Interesting. Welcome to the Dunseith Debacle live stream. This is something that we're excited about, that we've been talking about doing and finally have the opportunity to do today. We've been doing a series of podcasts concerning the activities that have happened in a 100,000 square foot warehouse in Dunseith, North Dakota. Around 2.5 years ago, Mr. Charles Hofer purchased a building in Dunseith to begin operations for a RV manufacturing plant. During the remodel, there were items that were found that could have an effect on commercial aviation and a whole lot more than that. Mm-hmm. After those items were found, things began to go crazy for Mr. Hofer. Over the 4 episodes that we've released so far, there's been a substantial amount of evidence that we've released that shows evidence to support claims of stalking, intimidation, cover-up by a lot of agencies that have acronyms.
People and entities, yeah.
Yes. And even then potentially indie commerce, and that was some part of an episode or a evidence drop that we did today, where we released part 1 of that evidence, a few hundred pages of correspondence about some of the activities that have happened there.
And you can access all of that on mydakotan.com right now.
Right now. And so today we get to go and take a step further. We are joined by industry experts and more. So I want to say a huge thank you to everybody that has joined us today, to Ed Pearson, Joe Jacobson, Charles Hofer, and Senator Kent Weston. Thank you all for joining us on this podcast today. Really appreciate you guys making time for this. So this is what we want to do. We're going to go around the horn and allow each of you to introduce yourselves. And so, Charles, with you kind of being the epicenter of this today, why don't you go ahead and lead us off?
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you very much for hosting us and allowing for this format to take place. And so, again, I'm not an aerospace expert. The other two gentlemen that are on the row next to me are. I'm an RV expert and composite engineering expert for transportation bodies, and had basically family, as I mentioned before, has started a number of companies in our industry, both RVs and manufactured housing, and some of them have become U.S. #1 brands. Previously designed the world's first carbon fiber RV. And when we purchased the site in North Dakota, I think you summed it up pretty well. We're launching some revolutionary tech for the RV industry, and in the process of getting the factory basically torn out and rebuilt so that we could run this project, we encountered a myriad of challenges and surprises and things that bring us to where we are today.
Very good. Senator Kent Weston, if you could also introduce yourself, go ahead.
And I, too, appreciate the work you guys have done, and for Joe and Ed joining us. And I'm the senator from this area, and so Charles had reached out to me, and that's why I got involved. I'm a farmer, two-time, two-session senator, state senator in North Dakota. Went to school for engineering. So Charles, as he has shown me some of this material, it was very concerning for me, and it makes a difference for this area, what he's trying to do, create jobs, and because of that, I got involved.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us today. Ed, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Ed Pearson. I'm the executive director for the Foundation for Aviation Safety. And as soon as I heard this story, I echo what Senator Weston just said. This is a concerning story to us. It got our attention immediately. And the more we've learned, the more concerned we are. So we're happy to be here and lend any kind of expertise that we have to the discussion.
Thank you very much for joining us. And lastly, Joe.
Thanks for having me. My name is Joe Jacobson. I'm an aerospace engineer with about 40 years of experience. I worked for Boeing for about 11 years and then the FAA for almost 26 years, and was in the middle of the 737 MAX debacle, and that's how Ed and I met through that, and we're both Senate whistleblowers and have spent a lot of time working on aviation safety together in the last couple of years.
Fantastic. And again, thank you for being here with us as well, Joe. Now that we're kind of transitioning from that, you want to start moving into a little bit of more of a recap where we're kind of picking up on?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So great. Yeah. Like Jonathan was saying earlier, this is a crazy situation that Mr. Hofer has run himself into. About 2.5 years ago, like Jonathan said, we have Mr. Hofer first purchased the facility, started to do some renovations and repair work, and that's when some of these issues first started arising and falling into place how it is now. And thankfully, fast forward about 2.5 years, Mr. Hofer has been going through these issues and situations, and that leads us to closer to this fall when he had finally reached out and went more public with the situation. Senator Weston stepped in along with some other state legislators, and then fast forward, we've now been doing the podcasts. We're pretty well caught up through where we're at right now. So looking forward, we're going to, Charles thankfully reached out to to Ed and Joe, and we are able to go and really do a deep dive on some of these avionics issues that we have, and really look forward to getting your gentlemen's opinions and being able to dive deep into some of this subject matter here.
So kicking it off, I would love to hear your take, Senator. At what point of this story, as it was going along, did you decide that this was something that you needed to be a part of and really begin to bring credibility and support to it?
Months ago, Charles reached out to me, and I could tell that he was afraid. And he told me some situations of being stalked and harassed, and I didn't know if that was true or not, but I could tell he was definitely afraid. And I would say just a few days later, I made an appointment to come and see the evidence and see the situation. It still took quite a while for me to get my arms around it, that this could be happening in our state, but he was a young entrepreneur, wanted to assist him, and so I kept working with him, working with Commerce, trying to get his business going. And getting to know him, I found out that he always told me the truth. He was very credible. I could tell that he had a lot of experience in this area, that he building RVs, and so I wanted to give him a chance to be successful doing it in our state. And then I could see the pushback from other entities in the state, so I was quite concerned about that. And when I started hearing some of the recordings of different federal agencies where they talked about the seriousness of this, I became very aware that it was serious and it needed to be looked into. And over time, we've just seen that that's increased in seriousness. And so I knew I needed to try to do my part to help him get somebody to investigate this situation and help him get his business going as well.
Undoubtedly. Yeah, that's fantastic reasoning for getting involved, especially for Charles reaching out to his local state senator. And thankfully, Senator Weston, you did step in and started helping to give Charles some credibility on a larger scale. Moving on off that, Charles, real fast, at what point, why was it important for you to, obviously outside of the obvious reasons, why was it important for you to reach out to some national experts on this subject?
Well, I think, working with state legislators and starting to uncover issues which, keeping in mind what brings us to today, is that we've been trying for over 2 years now to just get the issues cleaned up and moved on. And it reached a point where communications, including through entities funding us through the state, had been completely cut off when we brought the legislators in, arising to what was found and how that affected different entities. Then, as the senators moved us forward, and I think Senator Weston could speak to this, they reached a point where I think they felt that they were almost blue in the face, being given the runaround and trying to work on moving this forward, both for getting the investigations moving, making sure that our site got properly picked up and cleared. There are still some things there that shouldn't be there. It should have just been taken and wiped out. And reaching out to Ed and Joe and starting to have discussions with them, it helped us to realize that, we're not alone. Other people have gone through kind of their own crazy journeys of seeing fraud and corruption in aviation and aerospace. And when it's very governmentally driven, I think there's oftentimes a lot of pushback or resistance for various motivations to want to address it. Problem we had was it was potentially criminally tying up our site and our business to be able to move forward and needed to be unwound. And so we're very grateful they're engaging. and grateful that they're helping us to basically discuss today the aviation and the national issues associated with it.
So obviously we have two experts that we are wanting to get cued into this conversation. Mm-hmm. And so you've Joe and Ed, you've worked with Charles, you've heard his story. You've worked with Charles and you've heard his story. And we'll start with you, Ed. At what point were you like, this is something that we need to look into because it may tie into some of the things that we're looking at, or for whatever reason?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as we heard the story, it got our immediate attention. I probably should have given a little bit more background on myself because people know me as the Boeing whistleblower. But I had worked in the Boeing company for 10 years, and I had worked in manufacturing. I had seen, complex industrial manufacturing, and we have a lot of contractors and subcontractors, as you guys know. But most of my background is actually in the military. I served in the military for 30 years, and I worked in several different positions like Operations Center Director and Squadron Commanding Officer and some positions like that. And, I learned very quickly this importance of protecting critical technologies, and at one time I actually worked in the Defense Trade Controls Political Military Affairs organization at the State Department. So as soon as I heard this, I was concerned because on several levels. I mean, obviously concerned on a commercial aviation safety perspective and also military aviation safety. But this technology, as you all know, is and you've been talking about it, is used in a wide variety of critical national security type products, missiles, for example, submarines, etc. So it didn't take very long to realize that this was a very serious topic. What's taken a long time for me to get my head around is the lack of responsiveness, that what should be a much stronger, much more aggressive responsiveness on the part of our federal agencies. And, as soon as I heard this story that this was a site and it had these issues that have been going on since the previous company had shut down, you would expect this site to would have been immediately, guarded and cornered and basically secured. That's how we're trained in the military, right? If you see something that is dangerous or potentially dangerous, like classified materials or parts of the missile systems, etc., that stuff should be highly, there should be a very strong reaction. And, after an airplane accident and a military airplane accident, they cordon off the area. They protect the area because they know there's evidence. This is important, So this is what's been the most striking part of the story for me is Mr. Hofer has gone out of his way to alert all these different federal agencies. And for whatever reason, they come to the site, they're shocked by what they see, and then nothing seems to change, and the agencies are kind of pointing at each other. So this is a concerning to me on several levels, and I'm really appreciative of the fortitude of Mr. Hofer and you guys for running the story that otherwise nobody would know at the national or international level.
For sure. Yeah, thanks, Ed. I have one follow-up before we get to Joe's on this. Ed, so you mentioned that you were concerned with the lack of response from federal agencies. Why do you think there has been such a lack of a response?
Well, having unfortunately worked with some of these federal agencies, I know that you may have people that say local representatives of these federal agencies that come out to the sites and they see something and they know it's not right and they go back and report it to their supervisory chain. And somewhere it gets lost in the bureaucracy. It's just a bureaucratic, inexcusable delays, inexcusable reaction. That's why I think this is so important to bring this up at the national level, because you really need this top leadership of these critical organizations like the State Department, like the Department of Defense, like the Department of Justice. They need to be aware of this because somewhere in the bureaucracy it's getting lost, and that's the only reason I can kind of in my mind imagine that it's happening like that.
Sure. And so before we dive too far into this, Joe, same question to you originally. At what point when Mr. Hofer reached out to you and you started looking into the situation, did you realize there was more to it than meets the eye?
Well, he's done a lot of research. So Charles sent us a whole bunch of information, and I could see that, he's not letting this just slide. He's trying to actively figure out what's going on here. And so, I looked into some of those things, and some of the reactions of some of the agencies caught my attention as well. Like Ed, I've spent many years having different federal agencies kind of, when something's almost too big, they don't know what to do with it, so they do nothing, or they pretend it doesn't exist. And so I saw those sort of reactions, I would say, and so that got my attention. And then, of course, this is a critical. My background's all in commercial aviation, and this is a critical sensor that he's brought to our attention. So having it being a critical sensor, Ed and I were in the middle of another critical sensor, a different sensor, the angle of attack sensor on the MAX, where one single sensor brought down a couple of airplanes with many other issues that went along with that. But we know it's critical to just chase it down and figure out what's going on and how big of a problem this is for the commercial aviation industry.
Sure. No, that's a great way to look at it. And so, Ed, we'll go back to you real fast here. So specifically, what piece of evidence did you see that led you to believe this was really something deeper than it looks like?
Well, I mean, one thing we're certainly not short of here is evidence, right? There's a mountain of evidence. So I've gone through just a small portion of it. But, when you look at, records, invoice records, shipping records, site inspection records, he's got an extensive array of evidence. And really what we should be asking is, how come these agencies aren't jumping all over this? And I think it's so big, it's so gigantic that they're having a hard time wrapping their brain around it. Is this something that the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General should control? Is this something the State Department Defense Trade Controls organization should own? Should office of should the Attorney General's office and really from working in DC and working with these organizations for many years, I think the thing that needs to happen is they need to form an interagency group to dive deep into this and have the appropriate expertise. One thing I did years ago is, we worked on different task forces and interagency task forces in Washington D.C., both at the Pentagon and at the State Department. So I know these organizations exist. I think that as the previous voices have said, this is a big sticky wicket, and people really don't know where to start. And to me, it starts by acknowledging this is a potentially criminal situation that has national security and aviation safety issues, and we need these authorities to investigate it accordingly.
Undoubtedly so. So before we start diving into the specific of the parts that we did find on the site, Joe, do you echo pretty much most of what Ed said there, or is there anything else that really specifically stood out to you, evidence-wise?
No, I think Ed, he summarized it well. There are a few critical components that always get everyone's attention. Any sort of laser gyros, which are used for inertial reference, that's a critical piece of the aviation system. So, obviously we have to pay attention and do the investigation and make sure that we know the scope of this scheme or whatever it turns out to be.
For sure. Yeah. So looking at a couple of those potential parts that we did find, we for sure there has been the GG1320 gyroscope avionics sensor on there. And we also have found the Laser Ref 6 inertial reference system. If I'm incorrect, please stop me. And then we also found files related to nuclear issues and B-52s, and also different parts to different kinds of sensors relating to MLRS rockets. Is all of that correct, Charles?
Yes, sir. That's correct. Yes, sir. 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 Yes, s
So the laser ref system you mentioned just simply contains the GG1320 sensor.
Oh, excuse me. Okay.
So extensively GG1320, tactical HG1700 ring laser gyros, which is a military variant.
Sure.
The guided multiple launch rocket system called GMLRS, number one missile procured by the Army. There was tech for that missile related to its guidance system, not just printed documents, but actual CAD files, digital media, engineering data, as well as actual parts. And then records of sales to China mixed in with a box of mostly GG1320 stuff, but also near a nuclear technical file and near what looked to be some GMLRS work file. So just a smattering of a mess. And then amongst the records were very clear and explicit instructions that at least certain work being sent back to Dunseith was supposed to remain off of the audit trace. And when we're purchasing a site where these crimes can be property-based and we find out that there's instructions, A, this stuff shouldn't be here and I legally can't have it, and B, there's instructions that what came here is supposed to stay off the books, that scares me. I mean, it terrifies me from the standpoint that we bought this site from government and what happened here. I mean, it was just terrifying. So those are some of the highlights of the parts. There were many other parts, files, documents, hard drives. There were roughly 10 years or more of what appeared to be digitally archived site records as well, on all kinds of burned and copied and backupped digital media, which agents ended up taking.
And so again, before we dive all the way into the avionics side of it, just a little more context for anyone. Again, if you haven't watched the first 4 parts of our podcast series with Charles, you should certainly check those out. But so everything that was found on site, it is yet to be recovered, correct? There are still items on site today.
Most of it has been recovered. There's still some things that should be recovered that have not been. Not much. We're still not comfortable that we have to live with this stuff. Like basically government's tech, like it's a rotting corpse, and we're just told basically lock the body and just forget about it and move on with your life. They should have come and they should have picked up everything.
Closed in 2015, and so we're looking between 2015 and not just when you bought the building in 2022, but also going into 2023, the potential of these 1320 sensors being not just manufactured, but also potentially refurbished on site. And what are some potential issues with them having been manufactured on site in your facility in that intermittent 7 to 8 year period?
So it's been confirmed through Benchmark Electronics Lead Outside Counsel, which is a subcontractor to Honeywell, who then sends this product to Lockheed, Boeing, and Airbus. It's been confirmed that the upper assembly, which is the circuitry in the top half of the cover of the 1320, was made at this site prior to its closure. What has also been confirmed is that aspects, which Benchmark was very adamant that only a metal part came back. We've never had a good explanation for why things came back after our site was closed, except to say that they lost track of the gentleman who used to control the site. After we bought the site, they continued sending packages into the town and earmarked those packages with secondary instructions, which we photographed to send them, for example, to a downtown tavern. So those parts in their maneuvering, you run all sorts of risks because it's supposed to be done in a controlled clean room, dust-free environment called FOD-free, which is foreign object debris-free. And these parts are transiting a bar. They're transiting housing. They're being worked on in unknown locations because no one knows exactly where these parts went. They just know from the records that they came in by the thousands. We've had a witness who's observed work in recent years in a filthy loading dock. We know the south end of our facility was used because we saw evidence of solder stations when we brought an expert in during the cleanup, and the south end had no static controls. So it's extraordinary, given that the records support that circuitry was worked on extensively, that you have potentially lot contamination of upwards of 10% or more of the world's supply, and only a small fraction is traceable.
So, Ed and Joe, as you begin to hear this information coming out, and obviously you've seen evidence of this information as you've already addressed, what concerns do you have when you begin to think that, realize that perhaps the GG 1320 components were being worked on here and other key components like that were perhaps being worked on a facility like this? Is there a chance that this could actually affect commercial aviation or any other aspect of aviation?
Let's start with Ed and have Joe go second.
I'm sorry. I think you...
Sorry, I was having a great conversation with myself.
Yeah, it looked like a good time.
You're all set.
Yes, absolutely. This is absolutely something that could have an effect on aviation safety. It's a critical component, as we've been discussing, inertial system and gyro, and weapon systems and flight controls and everything. And we're talking large numbers of potential defected parts. Upwards of I think the numbers I was looking at is somewhere in the range of potentially 30,000 parts that could be out there in the supply system. And Charles, if I have that wrong, please correct me. But
that's correct.
Yeah, so this is concerning. There's a phrase that in commercial aviation is used. It's called latent defect. In the military, we called them gremlins, and these were aircraft systems problems that would come out at when you wouldn't expect it. You never want to have a problem, but these things would be intermittent in nature, very difficult to troubleshoot. Often leads to what we would call no fault found maintenance troubleshooting, and it's just a very difficult thing to get your hands around. And oftentimes, when aviation systems like avionics systems have problems, they just do what we would call an R&R, which is a remove and replace. They would just take the component out because they felt it was cheaper and better to just pull this component out and replace it. And these are extremely expensive components in some cases, and the problem with that strategy is a lot of times it takes multiple incidents to occur. We study aviation safety reports all the time, and there's often indications of electronic type issues, not necessarily to this particular part. But my point is that, yes, this is absolutely of a concern to commercial aviation safety, all aviation, actually. It's very disturbing. I can't tell you how disturbing it is as a retired military officer to tell you that when the military knows that a site has this type of documentation, parts, there's supposed to be a very specific process if a defense contractor shuts down, right? The operation is strictly controlled, like we talked about, static free environments, foreign object debris controls, security controls, all that kind of stuff. And certainly when a business shuts down, they're supposed to do it properly. There's a proper way of, shutting everything down and inventorying things, securing material, all that. And this just seems like it was literally like, just leave in the middle of the night and we'll clean out this space if we feel like it. It's just irresponsible. But what I want to just underscore, what's really mostly irresponsible is that you have important organizations like the Department of Defense, like the State Department, like the FBI. I mean, they need to take this seriously. And, there was a discussion earlier about potential China sales or sales of this technology to other countries, perhaps. That's very concerning. There's a reason that there's a law called ITAR, the International Trades and Arms Regulation. It's because we're trying not to allow potential enemies to get information that we don't want to share. And this is a critical part, and simply inexcusable from my vantage point. How come the agencies haven't responded much more aggressive? And I'm really hopeful they listen to this podcast and people get upset. And I also want to say, before I forget, Because sometimes it's hard. We see this on the aviation safety side because, we've been tracking and reporting issues with the 737 MAX airplane. People, until it potentially affects them, it's difficult for people to really understand. This isn't just something that, nuclear missiles and it's, top secret, DoD stuff. This is also day-to-day operations, day-to-day flights. We really think the FAA needs to do a lot more and get in and take a hard look at this, because it's a potential latent defect that could cause fatal crashes. And I think Charles has got some evidence perhaps that some military aircraft have experienced these types of really dramatic loss of control situations that have led to fatalities. So yeah, this is a serious topic, and it deserves a lot of attention, a lot more attention than it's getting.
So basically what you're saying is that the effects of this could have potential negative effects on just a commercial flight. If I jumped on the wrong airplane from Minneapolis, St. Paul, or whatever, then it could potentially affect that flight in some way.
Well, all modern airliners have backup systems and redundancy and stuff, right? But yes, anything that's considered a flight critical component, if it fails at the wrong time, in a busy stage of flight, taking off, landing, if there's a weather avoidance, night, air traffic control considerations, there's lots of things that could potentially cause pilots to get saturated and overwhelmed. And Joe, this is really more in Joe's area, so I'm going to defer to Joe to talk a little bit more about the potential impact, to the flight station.
Yeah, there's a good reason to have all these very exacting and strict standards to make these things, because as Ed said, you don't want to introduce latent failures into these components. And the way the components are used, they're architected together in various ways on various airplanes. Everything's a little bit different. There are things like some of the more advanced airplanes, they have maybe triple redundancy where they're looking at 3 units and comparing them. They've got a computer that's comparing them, throwing out a bad value. So that's the good end. The bad end is something like a 737 MAX where you have a single unit and it's up to the pilots to notice that something's going awry and intervene and fix it. So it really runs the full gambit of, from, an architecture where it's very vulnerable to one that's not very vulnerable. So that's something that the FAA should be investigating. They should be trying to identify, where these are, if that's possible, and, get them either out of the supply chain or figure out a way to test them to find out if there's flaws that they haven't found before.
Sure.
And one thing, if I could just add to this, because you guys are very gracious in referring to us as experts, and like anybody that's been in any profession for long enough, you realize that there's still a lot to learn. And Joe and I don't profess to know everything, but this is why you need these organizations like the FAA, and Department of Defense, and these organizations that can bring in other experts, people that have expertise and, great level of expertise and some technical expertise. This is clearly warning bells kind of stuff. This is, alerts should be flashing. Let's get some experts, some really more experts out there to take a hard look at this, because it is a very serious situation.
If I could add in there, with I think some of my earliest discussions with Ed, and then when he brought Joe in to speak with me as well, one of the things that we've talked about is this thing of potential clear sky turbulence. See, there might be issues occurring already by the dozens each year on newer jets that aren't even being properly reported because no one's even considering that it might be a technical issue. And an example would be, you read in the news and there's these huge increases in jets causing serious injuries to flight passengers, where the FAA is now telling people you have to buckle your seatbelt when you fly all the time, because they don't know when someone's going to get thrown into the ceiling next. There's a 2007 paper authored by NASA that specifically talks about these inertial reference units and the fault tolerant redundancies. And as Joe mentioned, they sync, right? They talk to each other. One is online, and that hardware is reading if there's 2 or 3 systems, or if you're operating one and then that one has too many failures, you have to manually switch over to the other. But in the fault tolerant units where they're talking to each other, they're designed to be low maintenance, meaning hardware can get knocked out for years. And as long as there's enough of those 1320 gyros still running, that thing is going to let the jet fly, and it's not going to flag maintenance that they need to go start pulling parts out. And then what NASA warned on Boeing 777s is they said, hey, sometimes too many things get knocked off in midair, and all of a sudden the software is pulling readings from the least faulty bad sensor, and it can throw the jet haywire. It can even disconnect the autopilot system. It can overwork the pilots. And they cited a particular incident of this. And there are other incidents that you can study, such as Qantas 72, that caused well over 50 serious injuries. And then if you look at those types of incidents and you look at planes people are flying today, Boeing Dreamliners are having catastrophic head knocks. And that's, an example of a jet that, of all the reports I could find when Joe and Ed showed me how to start searching government databases, and they've kind of left me in recent weeks to start that legwork of looking. Yes, you can find the Ataru system failures by the bunches, and you can also find these turbulence events where the government is still investigating, or closed off the investigation and said, it's not the weather, but it's probably clear sky turbulence. And yet you're having people smashing their heads in the ceiling, people getting paralyzed, people fracturing vertebrae, people getting concussions and brain bleeds and snapping legs in half. And these incidents have happened to where there's been over 300 injuries tracked just this year to the middle of December on Boeing and Airbus. And almost 3/4 of those are on Boeing, despite the fact that Airbus flies more planes. And we know Boeing runs more of these sensors than Airbus, because Airbus has a tendency to also run a Lytton system sometimes. And then we also know that in the Dreamliner is one of the newest, most exotic advancements. Honeywell publicly promotes it runs the LaserRef 6 system, which is called Embedded GPS INS. It's the advanced military style of inertial navigation. And that Boeing Dreamliner, from all the studies I could find, is accounting for close to 25% of all the turbulence flight incidents this year. And yet it's only a small fraction of the number of flights.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Charles. You make some really good points there. And one thing you did mention was clear air turbulence, and I want to get into that in 1 second. But before we do, I have a question. I believe it's for Joe, but Ed, if you think this is better for you, please take it. So when we're talking about the GG1320 sensors, just generally speaking, if one of them were to go awry and become faulty, what would it generally look like in a plane?
Well, listen, I'm going to take all the hard questions and I'm going to forward them to Joe, but I'm going to give him a little bit of a top cover if I can. And I'll tell you that this is what's so really hard for people to get their minds around, because you don't see this equipment. When you're sitting in seat 23C under the floorboards, these electronic bays where you have all these components and wires. It's a very, very complicated environment. Imagine the most complicated server rooms you've ever seen if you're a computer IT person. And so I would just tell you that one of the things is, if I can go back to just something that Charles said about clear air turbulence and the possibility that these are potentially not actually environmental events, but potentially equipment failures, which have happened. I think what this should do is should cause us to question those events. Like, we shouldn't just assume that this was necessarily a clear air turbulence, especially if there's been a pattern like we're seeing on the 87 Dreamliners. So anyhow, I just want to say that, and I'm going to pass the hard part of the question over to Joe. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, what I mentioned before would be the answer, which is this specific sensor is used in a multitude of different ways, right? They could architect it together. They could combine it with another unit. They could have dual redundancy. They could have triple redundancy. They could even have more. So it really depends on the specifics. So the data that Charles is bringing up about the 787, that would be the first place I would look. I would look at the 787 and say, how is that architected together? Is it more susceptible to these latent failures of this inertial reference unit or not? And that's where the FAA should be looking. They should be going into the details of how these specific sensors are used on various airplanes. As I mentioned before, also the MAX, the pilot is the monitor, right? Some of these more advanced airplanes, it's computers doing the monitoring, comparing, throwing out the bad value if there's a bad value or a bad unit, which is usually good. But there's ways that those can fail, as Charles was kind of alluding to, where it may not be, handled very well by the computers, and you end up with more than one failure in a unit, and then you have some sort of flight upset. And with the MAX, the pilots have to stay on top of that. What they would see on their excuse me, their displays are generally tied to these units. So they'd see their displays acting funny or maybe jumping around, possibly blanking. In the LATAM incident, which is a South American airline that had 50 injuries, I believe was the number, they pointed to the fact that one of the pilots said that they saw the screens blank. And so that would be like an indication when you see either power interruptions or something in the displays that acts up, that could be an indication of this type of failure.
Yeah, sorry. Great. So going off of that, when we're talking about how could this potentially correlate between what clear air turbulence is supposed to be and what the resulting effects of the potential faulty sensors are? Is there likely a correlation between the two? We'll go with Ed first.
Ed, do you mind if I share the couple of bits because Ed and I had a 3-hour talk on this week, and it was, they pointed me in a direction to these government databases that I could see turbulence from 2002 to present. There's almost none of these incidents taking place in the early to mid 2000s. And when you look at like the primary clear air turbulence is your convective, where you're flying and all of a sudden you hit usually just a freak updraft or downdraft, and it just throws the plane a few hundred feet quickly. We're seeing crazy reports in the last 3 years, particularly, where I give you an example. One plane had an uncommanded roll 45 degrees to the left, followed immediately by an uncommanded roll 45 degrees to the right and crushed a person's ribs. Another plane climbed instantly within a few seconds, 700 feet, followed by a 1,300-foot drop. The Singapore Airlines flight, which resulted in someone's, hitting their head in the ceiling and then supposedly dying afterwards from a heart attack, and injured dozens and dozens and dozens of people seriously. 20 were in serious condition in the hospital and many paralyzed. That plane's flight incident report so far is showing that the plane was oscillating. It was actually going up and down with equally opposing G-forces. So somehow it's hitting air that's in both directions at the same time, which doesn't make any practical sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point you make with that. And so going off of the clear air,
Go ahead.
Going off. Go.
Sorry, Kyler. I was just going to add that the thing about this clear air turbulence, it does almost seem like this is a new phrase that's come out in the last however many years, but the lack of predictability and the fact that, you're flying along and it doesn't look like there's going to be any kind of, potential turbulence. And then all of a sudden it is. Um, I know from my personal experience in the military, the plane we flew was an older plane, but we would constantly be in and out of weather. And, it was rare, extremely rare. In fact, I was trying to think of a situation where we were in, basically visual flight rules, VFR conditions, and all of a sudden we experience severe turbulence. I mean, I'm sure it happened, but it really wasn't something you would see with the predictability. It's so significant now that we've actually had companies contact us. One company that has been trying for many years, they actually build a harness for it's like this thing that you can put a baby in that is strapped to the adult to help them prevent a baby from flying out of their hands in a turbulence of its situation. It's called Baby Be Air. And it's the fact that we're having to take these kinds of precautions really makes you think about, like, maybe a lot more scientific investigation really needs to be taken, because I've seen some of these reports and read these articles like you guys have of people being paralyzed and serious injuries occurring, and the idea of an infant flying up and hitting an overhead is just terrifying to me. So anyhow, for what it's worth, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, undoubtedly so. That's a great point you bring up. I never knew about that. That's incredible that they're even making something like that. But to go further into that a little bit, this might be pure speculation. If you don't want to go into that realm, I understand that. But do you think that these agencies, specifically the NTSB and maybe the FAA, are using clear sky turbulence as an excuse to not have to look into things harder, or is that maybe going too far?
Well, I'll tell you right now, we just wrote a letter and released a news release about the NTSB, and we have great respect for that organization. Historically, they've done great work, but specifically associated with the max disasters that we've been personally involved in and the families that we work with, there's information that the NTSB is concealing, and they're concealing it from the investigative authorities in Ethiopia and Indonesia. I don't think there's a deliberate effort in this case. I don't think there's a kind of a coordinated effort. But I think it's a matter of resources. The NTSB is only got like 450 people in their whole organization, and I mentioned this when I testified to Congress in April, that the only thing more dangerous than a dangerous environment is an illusion of a safe environment. And what I mean by that is, the FAA is really wholly dependent, or almost wholly dependent on the technical resources of the Boeing company and the FAA. And so, they are not really resourced well enough to do the work that we would like them to do. And so this is something that is so important that I think it needs to flow even into the universities and the research centers around the country that could help dig into this, because whatever the cause, whether it's clear air turbulence or avionic system failures, we don't want to be doing this right in the future. We don't want to have people flying up and hitting the ceiling, and it's really not a good thing.
Ed or Joe, sorry, it looked like you might
Yeah,
have been going to chime in.
I would just add that you should be skeptical when they say the weather did it or the bird did it. You should be skeptical. They blamed the second MAX crash on a bird hitting an angle of attack sensor, and even though there was no evidence of that, there was no bird remains, there was no sound on the cockpit voice recorder. There was really no evidence. But see, that's the easy solution is, it was an act of God, or, it's not our fault, right? There's no liability. So you should be skeptical. You should push. And that's what I've tried to do, because sometimes they bring me something that they claim is a turbulence event. And you can clearly see, if you look at a little bit of the data, that that's not what happened. It wasn't turbulence. It was a flight control anomaly of some type. So I think, your instincts are correct to look into other, possible flight control issues.
So very soon we're going to open this up for questions from the legislators that are listening in, and then the public can put their questions in the comments, and we will ask some of those on the ones that seem fitting. We'll ask those on the broadcast. But I want to ask this question, and we hear all this. There's sounds like a very high potential that there's some very nefarious things that have went on there, or at least potentially illegal things that went on in this factory or this warehouse. But we're also talking about other things that have happened, and it seems like it keeps getting pushed under the table. Either, and I don't know who I'd prefer to direct this question to, so either Ed or Joe, why is this just not looked into, investigated, and taken care of? Why is there this desire or seeming desire to push these things under a rug and hide them rather than just taking care of them and moving on?
I'll take a quick shot at that. I hate to say it, but it's a failure of leadership. If you have a representative of your agency, like the FBI or the Department of Defense, goes out to a site, sees something that's clearly not right, clearly has safety, security concerns, that report that goes back to that leadership team, whoever that might be, that's a first stop failure, right? That's where things are breaking down at. Because if that agent had come to, say, some of the bases that I served on in the military, that would have went right to the base commander. The base commander would have immediately made a phone call to the Pentagon, and there definitely would have been a security team out on that site locking the place up. And so same thing with law enforcement, same thing virtually in all these agencies. So all I can say is it's been an unfortunate bureaucratic failures and lack of leadership. And that's why, our suggestion is that the communication needs to go to the very top of these organizations, because it's important. Until they rule it out as not a concern anymore, they need to take it as seriously as they can.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And go. Do you have anything to add to that, Joe?
I was just going to add that that's another good reason to go to the top of the organization, because at the lower levels, this might seem overwhelming. So they don't want to deal with it because it's too overwhelming. So that's another reason to go to the top of these organizations, where they're more equipped to handle bigger issues, bigger, a scope that's much bigger than some of the lower level people are used to.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing about this story. It is, if you allow it to, it becomes overwhelming very fast with all the different tie-ins that play in. And that leads me to a question for you, Senator Weston. Obviously, there's the federal part of this story, but there's also the state part that has been. We talked about some of the actual government and that how that played in our last episode, our last podcast episode. But there's also state agencies that were involved in this. That should have helped get the factory shut down and cleared out properly. What are some of the concerns that you have, or maybe support for the way that the state has handled the situation in Dunseith?
We've consistently been told by Commerce that they're supporting this project, that they're for this project. But then just the opposite happens time and time again. Clearly, they're not supporting it. They're actually undermining this project, and it's been extremely frustrating. And so we need answers even to why that's happening. The Department of Commerce is there to help businesses. This is a business in, depending how you measure it, the poorest county or second poorest county in the state. And we're talking a lot of jobs, job creation, very important to this area and to the state. And so that has just been incredibly frustrating. When you get deceived time and time again, I can't tell you how frustrating that is.
Absolutely. Well, again, we're about to open this up to the legislators, so be sure, legislators that are on the Zoom call, get your questions ready. If you want, you can raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll address you, and then you can take yourself off of mute. Before we do that, though, I do want to say, Charles, as you hear this, and obviously you've had a lot of conversations with Joe and Ed on this topic, what's the next steps that you want to see come from this?
I think I've been asking from the beginning that the issues just need to be taken care of by authorities. The evidence that we released today, start to finish until the primary cleanup and then our discovery of the entities involved in how the mess came to be, showed that we were directed by high-level state officials as to every single step, and we followed every step. And we did everything that we were told to do. Then in the process of different agents and agencies responding to the site and not handling it right, some of those agents connected to the state, some connected to federal government, it just seems like the lack of accountability for doing it right the first time has resulted in many more messes that now need to be addressed and cleaned up. In addition to that, our address was misused for nearly a year, and there's been new entities registered in the state that are using our address, and one of them has an obvious defense acronym. I've talked about this before, but in FedEx's database, we were a white house on the other side of town for our facilities industrial site, and we only found out the first time this year when we did a FedEx delivery and we lost our parcel on the other side of town. FedEx insisted it was right, showed photographs that they dropped it off right, and then later apologized and said, sorry, that's your address in our system. Things like that have just been too weird to explain, that are still not fully addressed and resolved, need to be addressed and resolved. And then the national issues, I'm certainly concerned for everyone who flies. It's certainly concerning enough that it makes me think twice. And it's, looking at a part that's this critical and sensitive, and that's the only one that I really know by volumes was reworked at the site, because I can prove it by the records, but I know from witnesses that there was more work done there. And it worries me what else was worked on and where else did it go. So those are things that I think need to be fully investigated, looked at, and addressed, not least of which, so that my site can be formally and properly declared for our company and myself a victim and a federal witness, and move on from all of this. We don't want the liability of it. Part of our initial motivation in reporting was just, hey, federal government, come clean up your mess. Look what we found. And then they said, no, you have it. And we couldn't believe it. I mean, we were shocked. And, they knew we worked with international partners, Canadians all the time, and they weren't picking up their mess.
Great. Yeah. So one more question for Ed and Joe before we get into our legislators here. What should the next steps be going forward on the federal level be for either whether it be a cleanup or trying to resolve this issue in the aircraft? Ed, we'll start with you.
Well, this is going to be a bit more complicated, obviously, because there's a transition of government that's going to occur in the next couple of months. So this is going to be challenging, but I think this is one of the reasons why all the communications from all of you to feds needs to be done to the highest levels of the federal government, and even during the transition. From my knothole, there needs to be some very senior Department of Defense officials should be inspecting that site, going out to that site with the uniformed personnel, because that's my first concern is a national security kind of issues. And then in shoulder to shoulder with them should be a senior FAA personnel that should go out to that site and really do like Joe said and start to really think about, where are these parts, where can we track them? How do they, enter the supply chain? Where might they be? I mean, this could make other parts, horror stories that we've heard, seem real trivial. This is a big deal. So I guess I don't have an easy answer for you. I think it has to be taken extremely seriously. by the senior level. And at the State Department, people may not know this, but within the State Department, there's an organization called the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, and they're a liaison, if you will, with the Department of Defense. And so any kind of advanced technologies or technologies that can be modified, they don't even have to be like the newest technologies that could be potentially modified and weaponized. That's a big deal, and especially when you're thinking of things like drones and other concerns. I'm not trying to bring up the whole drone mess, but this is not something that you just push aside. That's you have a basically a civilian individual who's trying to do the right thing and just wants to build RVs, and the government is pointing at each other. And so I think the media has to stay on top of this. The media and the citizens need to demand that action be taken, and just waiting for somebody else to do it is not sufficient.
Do you have anything to add to that, Joe?
I just think the FAA needs to put together a special task force. We've mentioned that before. Other government task forces, the FAA at least needs to show that they are taking this seriously, that it's not one of those things where it's such a big problem that they're just going to ignore it because they don't know what to do. What they need to do is put together a task force and come and try and identify if there's a way to identify the bad parts. They need to do that. If there's no way to identify it, then they need a mitigation plan. How are we going to make sure these latent failures are not introduced into the system? So they just need to get up and be very active and really attack this.
Absolutely. All right. If there's nothing else that we want to add to this segment, we are going to go ahead and transition to a more open Q&A format.
So any final remarks from anyone before we do move on?
So
easy.
Basically, we do have some legislators that are in a Zoom call with us right now. And so we first want to open up the discussion to you guys. If you have a question that you want to ask of the experts that are on the call today, or Mr. Hofer, then please go ahead, unmute yourself, and ask that question. We see a bunch of mics unmuting themselves. Here we go.
I was like Castaneda here, Senator District 40. What kind of response have we gotten from Senators Hoven, Kramer, obviously, Paulie Armstrong, now the governor, so he's out, and there'll be a little bit until Julie Fedorchak is in the House. But what kind of response have we been able to get from our representatives of the state that are supposed to be representing us and our interests at the federal level?
And Charles, why don't you go ahead and take that?
I think I can take a little of that, and then Senator Weston, you might want to touch point on some of your current engagements. So I reached out last year when I found this material to Senator Kramer. In this year, he's made it evidently clear that he does not want to discuss my situation. Very unfortunately, records on the site do indicate that he had some team members that were involved in the site, which I sure would like to think that it's just purely innocent and they were just trying to fundraise the site. But he's refused to engage. I've not personally had any contact with Hoven. Senator Weston may know more on that side. I believe Senator Weston is working on contacts with the new administration, and I think they seem positive so far. But I think I'll defer to him at this point.
I haven't really had contact with Senators Hoven or Kramer, but I have with incoming Governor Kelly Armstrong's team. And in fact, they may be on this call right now, and they seem to be much more engaging and want to participate in cleaning up the problem.
Very good. Thank you for that question. Senator, are there any other questions that we have from the participants in the Zoom call? If you go ahead.
I have a question. First of all, what would you like us to do?
Go ahead and lead the way on that one, Charles.
Well, I think from a legislator standpoint, we have Ed and Joe talking about the national issues, and those are things that certain legislators are certainly welcome to help us, try and pick up and push on that in order to really get our site unentangled. Then there's the state issue, which purpose of uploading nearly 500 pages of records today is so that anybody can go download and see that the North Dakota Department of Commerce, who was financially intertwined with our business, told us exactly what to do for nearly a year, how to clean it up. And then as soon as we identified records from the site that tied to some of these things we had to report were past activities that Commerce was involved in, they wanted us out of the state as quickly as they could. And that's where the misuse allegation and other things came up against our business. And those records will also be released in the coming days. And we'd really like to be able to just run our business. But we can't until we get financially disentangled with the state, because the conflicts of interest in regards to our project and having to clean up their past project are too high. And so we have to figure out a way to very politely and kindly just disentangle so that everybody can move forward. And then the chips fall where they fall in getting the site cleaned up, because there should be a lot of motivation to clean up. And I'd certainly like to think that many officials who were working on our site in the past didn't know or intend that it could create such a mess. I'd certainly like to think that there was, a lot of being misled or deceived. And some officials have spoken to that. Others have not. And I'd like to hear what they have to say.
Very good. Continue on, Representative Wolf, if you have any more questions.
Well, I guess, is there any further up the chain that you can go? Like,
we were, with the previous administration, we went as high up as the chief of staff for the governor, and we were promised follow-up. A couple of senators were with me in those meetings, and we were simply asked, do you have the evidence? And we said yes. And then there was a refusal to engage after that. We want to engage. We are not interested in shaking a stick at people. We're trying to just come up with solutions. But in those solutions, it has to be acknowledged that I have been threatened. I have been stalked. There are some actions that need to be taken to keep us safe and allow our business to run forward. And then
I'd like to add to Charles.
Go ahead.
That there's been certain promises and commitments made to Charles by the state, and they have not kept their end. They've pulled funds, they've shut them down. That's cost him a lot of money just to keep heat and lights in there for over a year while he's been dealing with this. And to his point, he did everything that Commerce directed him to do. He's got records of that, giving him step by step, and it was costly. They admitted that they were going to help mitigate those costs, and now all of a sudden they want him out of the state. They want him gone. And they'll deny that, but their actions say otherwise. And they talk nice, and then they undermine them. Just happened again this week. And that's the very frustrating part, is what is going on here.
And we've had investors, if I may, we've had investors who've offered for over a year to take our project forward. And the deals have been railroaded by a refusal to just simply meet minimum terms of even supplying something so simple as a contingent letter saying, where the lead investors will say, okay, we're going to put in this many million, and state, restructure your loan like this. They won't even discuss it. And they, I think it just to make the legislators aware, we had 3 years of additional term on our loan, and in perfect standing, it was technically defaulted out at the beginning of this year with no explanation. We weren't even given the official letter of it until 6 months later, and it was backdated. And that was after we had 3 or 4 deals that could have closed and brought us $5 million and allowed us to just get off and run without the state.
Very good. Any more questions, Representative Wolf?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe potentially Representative Van Winkle may have had a question. I saw her mic wasn't muted.
Well, I was just. Did I freeze here?
Nope, we
can hear you.
We can hear you fine.
Okay. Well, I was just going to add a little bit of comment here because to me, as I follow this whole entire, as we call it, debacle, it just seems concerning to me that we, as a state, you constantly hear this narrative of, economic development, and, certain winners and losers seem to get these economic incentives, but everything for Charles is just like hindrance and hamper, restricting. And I'm just curious if this is just proving the debacle of our system and the fact that I think these guys are appearing to show that they're the ones that are choosing who's going to be the economic winners in our state. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
If I could add, to that, Representative Van Winkle, I think the records that we've unloaded today, they're date ordered, and they go from when we first found issues on August 1, 2022, and where we've reached in the compilation of roughly 500 pages is to the middle third week of August of 2023. And what you can see is they were cleaning it up, helping us clean up with Commerce after some initial challenges with agents and with the Minot Air Force Base. The Department of Commerce stepped in, and I think a few people really stuck their necks on the line for a while, like Shaden Akison and Jessica took initially, where they pushed and they really had us, you do what we say, we'll take care of all this, don't worry, we'll put the money back. And you can see this in the records. And then as we reached a point where all of a sudden it starts to become more and more and more apparent that the state had some ties to all this that were actually causing some of the hindrance in us getting it cleaned up. And as we discovered handfuls of records from a local economic corporation that had state records that were hidden from us and other things, we asked questions about that. And within 2 weeks, they were never going to talk to us again. And we were actually told that through a third party that all communications had been cut off. And so then September 27th, and this will be some records we'll share in the next batch of 2023, I think they got scared, to answer your question, Representative Van Winkle, is I think it was do it all, let's get it cleaned up so no one ever knows what happened. And then when we found out what happened, on September 27, we say, look, we're just trying to clean up the big pink elephant in the room. There's never a lawsuit coming. We just want to figure out how to work together. And then I get put under a performance audit 3 days later, and I get told that I'm misusing funds. And then when I voluntarily give all of my business's information, including offering things like bank statements that they didn't ask for, and said, there's nothing to find here, you're welcome to search, then the backdated mortgage agreement came and other efforts to just try and simply take our assets came. And then we were just defaulted with no explanation. So those are some of the challenges where I think there's a little bigger issues at play. And I think a lot of it was fear. I think a lot of it was, let's just not look into this because we don't want to know how bad it is. And I think those challenges from whoever was directing those folks poured out onto us. And, maybe there's some winners and losers in that as well. But I think more than anything, if we had personally broken the law and destroyed the evidence, I don't think we'd be having this conversation today. I think I might end up in handcuffs at some point because things were still going on, but I think I would have remained under the full support of various officials.
I can attest to all those things that Charles just said, and even the misuse allegations, they've all been debunked. Ironically, they directed him to do two of the things. There was three different things that they said that he misused funds. They never bothered to come up and audit, which he invited them to do right there at the site. Hey, if there's something I'm doing wrong, let me know. Why would they allege misuse of funds and not even bother coming to the site? That's a huge red flag. But I can assure you, he did not misuse funds. Charles opened up his books to me. We went through everything step by step. So that's, like I said, a very concerning thing again.
If there's another, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we were a little bit fortunate because we have been immersed in this like you guys have, and so we have a little bit of a different perspective, but it almost seems like there's two parallel tracks that need to be followed here, right? There's somebody in the state needs to properly investigate what's happening, what the involvement was with local and state officials, and there's something doesn't seem right there that needs to be kind of investigated and looked into, and then on the parallel track is the issues of national international significance, right? So I'm venture to say that the legislators in North Dakota they're kind of ill positioned to kind of fix that problem, but this needs to be done on a parallel effort, and one thought that comes to mind is that you're all familiar with RICO type investigations or investigations they did for things like the mafia and other organizations, but the Attorney General's office, DOJ, supervises the FBI in effect, says the FBI is the investigative arm. It certainly seems that if you go to the Attorney General's office and kind of lay out the story, they can draw upon local law enforcement to assist in investigating what's going on here, and I think it warrants that is kind of what I'm saying. So it just I don't know, it just seems like it needs to be done on two parallel tracks, because the federal agencies are not going to be waiting for the North Dakotan legislator to move things along. This is going to have to be them making those decisions, and then likewise inside the state. It just seems like you almost have to pursue parallel courses at the same time. That's my vantage point.
Right. Yeah. It's that is part of the intrigue of the entire story, because there's almost potentially cover up on the cover up. Yeah. And from two whole different vantage points. And that's what makes it so intricate. And I was going to ask you, Ed, is there anything that the legislators can do for the federal level? How do they get someone involved that might hear this from at least that vantage point, that line, that parallel line that's running?
Well, there's at least two Senate committees in Washington, D.C. that should be familiar with kind of what's going on here. One is the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. Another one is the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and then you should certainly add in the Senate Armed Services Committee. So those are three committees that are charged with transportation safety, aviation safety, and military national security type stuff. So the local legislators, if they can help communicate to the senators and that are on those committees, that can help a lot by feeding that, because those committees have staff, like they have investigative staff that can assist. And the individual senators might be, they may not be equipped to do a full, like you talked about, interest from, say, Senator Hawley. He's got a million things going on, but he's on certain committees, and those committees might be the right avenue to hold a hearing and get the ball rolling, kind of thing. And we can certainly try to connect you guys with some of those committees that we've worked with in the past.
Absolutely. Opening the floor back up to the legislators. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question of Ed, Joe, or Charles? Okay.
I just want to make another comment, kind of a follow-up on what I was talking about. I just think, Charles, I believe you said up there in your location and in that area, the economic, sorry, turn off my cell phone here. Just that this has been a place where poverty has existed for such a long time. And the fact that having this company in this location is so strategically would be such a blessing to this community. It really just boggles my mind that the roadblocks are so big when the results would just be so beneficial. And then, I'm also curious, because I've been to your site, have you been able to produce your products at all, or are you just stuck spinning your wheels, defending your life and trying to, just suck all your resources into this fight? What's exactly going on in that area?
Thank you, Representative. To answer your question directly, we had about a $5 million budget, which is really for both our project and our industry. It's a skin of your teeth budget. We got $1.5 million into it when we had to start locking the site down. And from there, I've released a bunch of records that show that Commerce knew that we were basically spinning wheels, doing rebuild work on the site and things, but weren't able to just get running into production while we were waiting on the site to be picked up, because we weren't even sure if we could be on the site. I mean, it was a mess having to secure that stuff. And so we devoted extensive energy, hand in hand with the North Dakota Development Fund CEO, trying to get authorities to clean up the site. We now understand that there were deliberate roadblocks by some state and federal agents inside North Dakota that were preventing that cleanup. And during that process, it burned out about $750,000 additional dollars. And then we got the third evidence collection, and we thought we were going to run. And there's recordings and records of the state promising to replace the money that was burned out, let us finish mortgaging the site, then cooperating with their loan agreement so that we could finish the rest of our finance. Because another record we've released is that our ability to mortgage the site was frozen, which was supposed to be how we closed our $5 million. And so all of that then, within a matter of 2 weeks of being promised the funds and thinking in 60 days, finally the nightmare's over, we're taking off. Within 2 weeks, our state loans were frozen again. We hadn't even dispersed the originally promised loan. And then the freezing of that loan prevented us from being able to bring any additional capital except for EDC friends and family money that has been able to keep the lights on for the last year and 2.5 months, 3 months. And so we've been doing as much work as we can on products, but we need the rest of our money to put the rest of our inventory and machines on site. And then from there, in a matter of months, we'll be steamrolling with product out the door. So we've had those offers repeatedly to finish the capitalization. But as Senator Weston and I have discussed, it was like my hands were tied, my legs were tied. I was set on a bicycle and sticks were thrown in the spokes, and then I was told to go pedal. And so then every time we brought deals and offers, those offers for various reasons. I mean, there's one, I'll give a specific example this spring, $5.75 million cash deal was offered to close in 45 days. State officials said they wanted a meeting. They wanted to close the deal with the broker. And as we allowed the state in on the meeting, 3 senior state officials started accusing us of misusing funds to the broker, and we lost the deal. So and that's a public record. The state recorded the call. Legislators are free to request it. I will authorize it, even though it has some confidential discussion. And those are the types of things that happened behind the public records or behind the things that would be released when media makes records requests. So we've never been able to actually get on the bike and race and get our site set up. We've been able to tear the facility out. We've been able to put a little bit of inventory on, but we haven't been able to actually get the operation started for those reasons.
Great. Charles, I have one quick question for you here before we go further. If you were to operate as you wish, fully funded, all holds, everything gone by January 1st, rough estimate, how long would it be until you were able to produce your first RV?
Take 5 months to get the equipment and inventory on site. We'd start running lamination within 45 days at full tilt. And we'd have our first 50 employees and our first 35 $200,000 units out the door probably by October of next year. And then would be hiring at a rate of 30 to 70 employees a year, depending on how fast we can train. And we'd have enough demand and pre-sold product that we'll need probably 4 or 5 of these facilities, and each one can handle about 2 to 250 employees. And that's commensurate with the pace of other startups in our industry who have products that aren't even as good as ours. And they use $20 to $50 million of capital. We did our entire research and development phase, purchased and rebuilt a factory, and started setting up some of the production for $4.8 million over the course of about 8 years. We operate with an efficiency level that is not matched in our industry. And we easily have the ability to put 250 jobs with average wage and benefits over 55 grand in the poorest region in the state.
Kind of a add-on to that question. This comes from Mike from Facebook. Is there an estimated ending to this for you so you can get started with your business, or are your hands tied until this is over?
I think Senator Weston can talk to this because he was in the meetings. Just very candidly, I had meetings during the legislative organizational session with new legislators who I hadn't met before. Senator Weston also attended a meeting with the Department of Commerce, and senior level officials from Commerce suggested that the investigations had nothing to do with why my loan was frozen, but that it was because they were just disappointed in my pace during the opening of our facility last year. And so I simply sent some records from the Department of Commerce from that time period praising my pace, telling me the delays didn't matter and they were going to get me going once we got through it all. And one legislator responded and said, interesting, it looks like Charles needs to be in the room from now on. And there were about 13 legislators in that meeting. After that, we were told that we would have a meeting with Commerce, and a couple of legislators were on that meeting. Senator Weston was there. We brought our investor, who's been with us for 5 months now, to the meeting. An offer was made, and then we were told that it could be a matter of months until a decision is made. Then again, this past week, we had another meeting, and we were told that once the group that was mortgaging the site updated their underwriting documents, that they would definitely move forward. And then less than 1.5 hours later, they made a decision that they were not going to move on the deal and didn't even wait for the documents, and it angered some legislators and some of our other lenders. So, you know, you can't play ball when the goalposts are being moved all the time. As soon as this issue with the state loans is resolved, our business is off and running, and we're running full tilt. It's that simple. But until it is, we have to keep funding for survival mode, and it's already cost us, I want to say close to $1 million now out of pocket that we've had to come up with just in the last 12 months, 14 months.
Quick question on that, Charles. So if all the hindrances were taken away today, you're due compensation for all your losses. I mean, is there a lawsuit against the state in this, or like what exactly?
So I've repeatedly tried to balance the tightrope here, which is, yes, we would be easily within our rights for all kinds of deprivation of rights, defamation, and business interference action. But the minute that I threaten that, then officials within the Attorney General's office have an excuse to tell state officials to cut off all communication with my business and bleed it dry and let the court play it out. So I have repeatedly said, and I'll stick to my word, that I am not going to sue, and such a lawsuit is never coming. That way, the state has to remain engaged, and I will remain engaged. And I've repeatedly offered at the senior commerce official's request that I'll even sign him a discharge letter from those liabilities I'm not even aware of that exist in the background relating to this site, because I'm sure there's more I don't know about yet. And I'm willing to bear the consequence, overlook it, and just run the business.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's pretty respectable to say that you have a good company and you're ready to make that happen if they'll just stop the gameplay, huh?
We're more than happy to run forward, and we're more than happy to let bygones be bygones as long as credible threats that have been made against me are addressed physically, and the rest of it, just let the legal system play out, help, U.S. Senate, DOJ, others do work on the national scheme, working with folks like Ed and Joe's organization on that, because I think at this point, if everything, and Ed's first reaction to me was, my goodness, this should have just been picked up the day they saw it. Your site should have been quarantined. And in fact, I released an audio record today of a state agent saying that's indeed what the Air Force was going to do. And then somehow that decision got overruled. And so, this whole issue, I never should have known what was there. I should have just known I found stuff I'm not allowed to have. Government, come pick it up. They pick it up. A week later, they give me my site back, maybe two if it takes them some time and they find a mess. And then we're off and running again. And then none of us would be having this discussion. Unfortunately, I had to live with the evidence, and agencies in DC told me, if you want us to take action, because other agents inside the state were telling them there's nothing there. So they said, if you want us to take action, we need to know what's there. So I started engaging experts. I started going to old program experts, multiple program experts who used to be at the site, people who used to be in the industry, people who were in the industry. And I started asking, what do I have? And the more I found out, the more my stomach turned and my heart sunk. And I realized there's ethical challenges to this beyond just the challenges of making sure I'm covered from a legal risk standpoint for potentially classified stuff, potential government military technology spills, making sure that's resolved appropriately. Now there's the risks of, my goodness, Aunt Sue, Uncle Tom, daughters and mothers and spouses flying. I've just realized what happened. There's thousands of affected components in an aerospace supply chain that aren't being monitored, and the government tells people to buckle up. And I've released records today of me talking with federal agents about clear sky turbulence last year, that this is probably what's going to happen, is it's going to get worse because the government doesn't know how to address what was occurring at our site. And what was occurring is so bad, and it was fixing such a horrific problem in the manufacturing supply chain, that this quick fix, Joe's garage, might have been better than trying to do it all the right way. And that might be why you're seeing issues in airlines get even worse. Now, can I advance that as I know? No. But will any agent who meets with me deny it? No. Some of them off the record have told me that I'm exactly right in all of my fears and concerns, and that they share it. And when they say things like that, that makes me more concerned. And they tell me things like, be careful. And then there's threats made. So those are the types of things that, just finding a way to work past it all, move on. And I wish I never had to know any of this. But now that I do, the can is opened. And so now we have to kind of see what's there and see how we fix it all.
So perhaps a question for Senator Weston. This comes from YouTube from Kip Brennan. Based on your conversation, Senator, and I'm adjusting the question slightly, based on your conversations, Senator, what steps do you feel the Indy legislators might be willing to take to dig into this and see how high it goes?
Well, I think the first thing is for the rest of my legislators in the state to get informed about it and then put pressure on the state agencies involved to do the right thing. Now, as far as getting to the bottom of it, I think that's probably beyond our purview. What we can do is help Charles get his business going. And then we can bring in people like Ed and Joe that can get us the right contacts and, maybe unilaterally we can go to U.S. Congress people in the right committees. I just had Senator Jose text something to me about a letter to all, from a group of us legislators to the U.S. Congress people. I think that's a good idea. Put pressure on getting this resolved. So I think those are some good steps.
To kind of continue down that vein, either for Ed and Joe or for you, Senator, what can the general public do to help with this situation, if anything?
Well, again, getting informed and reaching out to their state legislators, letting them know that this needs to be resolved. Anytime you get people informed and active and putting pressure on their elected officials to do the right thing, we pay attention if there's enough of them. So I think the listeners reaching out to their representatives and senators and telling them, hey, this is a deal that needs to get fixed. This young man needs an opportunity to help our state be better, because I believe he will do it. He'll create jobs in an area that desperately needs jobs that will help lift this area up. I think that's a good first step.
Absolutely. For you, Charles, this comes from Mike on Facebook. Are there any models within the state that can be viewed? And you might be muted or...
Having a good conversation with myself.
Yeah, that's I heard.
No, we have demos that are being built up. There's a lot of patents around the design, and we can't release it publicly till we release a full production line, because that's the arrangement with the distributor for offtake. Everything is pre-sold. People under non-disclosure can feel free to ask to schedule a tour and go from there.
I have a question. I was just looking up something on the Attorney General's office in North Dakota. You have a organization called the Government Accountability Board. Are you guys familiar with that? Because I'm just looking at it. It sounds like it was formed and it has 4 members, and they're all either retired circuit court judges or Supreme Court justice. And their job is to look and see if there's anybody that's they investigate allegations of misconduct. Anybody holding a statewide office, any employees of the executive branch. I'm assuming that, well, actually, I apologize. That was actually South Dakota website, but I'm wondering if you have a similar type of accountability oversight entity, because this is the kind of complicated project where I think you need to have a team of people working on this, right? Like a team of people from North Dakota legislators, some team or staff or whatever put together to try to address the issues of, removing these obstacles to allow Charles to build those RVs and get that economy going, like Representative Van Winkle is talking about and Senator is talking about. I mean, it seems like that could happen in parallel, trying to alert, the senior federal officials. But I guess if this is all falls on Charles's shoulder when we hang up, and if this all comes back on Charles's shoulder to coordinate all this stuff, then we kind of failed, right? Like, I think some folks in the legislative arm probably need to take control of this and create like a committee. That would be my advice, that could work, and kind of move things along a lot faster than this guy who's trying to run a business, do the right thing, do all the things that he's doing. It's just too much for a person or a company for that matter. It really requires some government assistance.
I have a question. Is that Senator Castaneda again? What? Maybe I've missed it, but what kind of, I guess, help, call it, connections have you gotten with the Attorney General's office? And I had asked previously about, U.S. senators, but when now Governor Armstrong was Congressman Armstrong, did you initially get more support from him? And now that he's governor, granted it's been a very short time as governor, have you reached out to him since, or his office? Because obviously there's been obviously a change. So now with the new governor and any help he's given you before, and at the end of the day, Department of Commerce falls under the executive branch, which buck stops at the governor. What in the past week, has anything happened with the new governorship? I guess I'm asking.
Thank you, Senator. So, Attorney General first. We released an episode last week, and we're continuing to release evidence on the subject where 3 members of the Attorney General's office, 2 for sure, have taken actions against our business that were either one was obstructive, the other was unethical, and then it appears that the Attorney General's office was coordinating on trying to have me perjure myself on a securities instrument based on internal state records we've obtained. So there were 3 actions with the Attorney General's office that appeared designed to detach me from my property or make me not know what I was finding, simply because there were 2 state agencies involved in the finance and operation of my site before it was sold to me. In that process of cleaning the site, I've been promised in writing communication with the Attorney General in 2022, been promised verbally and in writing in 2023. Senator Weston scheduled a meeting for me and the Attorney General. In October 2023, the meeting was canceled while we were driving down on the 3-hour trip to Bismarck, and the Attorney General then refused to meet with me. So certainly concern. I did mention an agent in the state who worked with the base initially on some, we'll just call it failures to act, and who also, according to the IRS, made them believe that what was at our site was fake. That agent contacted a lender of mine last fall and called me a dirty crook. And then that agent told a police deputy a few months ago that he can't believe I'm still alive because I've pissed off so many people. That agent enjoys a very high rank inside the Attorney General's office. That's one of the threats that I would like to have addressed. Then in terms of Armstrong's office, I was truly terrified last fall as I started to uncover documents of the site that got worse and worse and worse. And that was when I met Senator Weston. At that time, I had reached out to Armstrong's office. I believe it was in Fargo. Had some discussion, wasn't questioned as to my credibility, but the intake person that I spoke to, I said, "Will I hear back from you guys?" And he said, "I'm not sure." And they didn't follow up with me. I may have tried to call twice, but that's where it ended. Now, recently, Senator Weston has been texting with the governor's office, and I believe he's spoken with senior official there, and they appear to be expressing an interest in wanting to tackle corruption and move forward. I'm eager to offer solutions and proposals for how to just move forward and tackle corruption at the same time. I'm very willing to engage, and I believe that There may be some governor's team folks monitoring the call tonight. They said they've watched all of our podcasts and they're following it very carefully. And so certainly I'll be following Senator Weston's cues after this meeting, but very willing to engage and help in any way I can. And if the Attorney General himself is unaware of what lower, subordinates that are, in the Assistant Attorney General roles or BCI roles, if they're unaware of what's happened, I'd love to sit down with the Attorney General and inform him and request some assistance, because I've been trying that for over 2 years.
A question from Michael Coachman for either Joe or Ed. What do you do when it feels like you've uncovered something like this, but the state agencies are part of the cover-up? And maybe you kind of addressed that earlier, but again, where should somebody turn to in your guys' experience with whistleblowers, et cetera?
I'll take this one, maybe just at least start it, is this is extremely frustrating because you're dealing with 3 levels of government, right? Local, state, and federal. And the problems that are existing at the state level, the retaliatory action that is occurring against Mr. Hofer about his financial loan and stuff is particularly disturbing when you think that he's trying to create jobs, just like Representative Van Winkle is talking about. It's very disturbing to think that somebody who's being brought in to do that gets inherits this gigantic mess and is left to clean it up. I mean, it's shameful, and so I think it's the North Dakotan leadership in the legislator need to create a team of people that can work through these problems, make him whole, fix his situation so that he can move on and build these things, but not lose sight of the fact that there's these critical public safety and national security components of this. This is a big deal, and it would be wrong to just simply focus on one or the other. And they both need to occur. So, and this is what's so frustrating as a whistleblower is you're dealing with multiple agencies. Joe and I have dealt with the Department of Transportation, the FAA, the National Transportation Safety Board, the Congress, et cetera. And it's exhausting. It takes an incredible amount of effort. As I've said publicly, whistleblowers need the support. I can without even knowing you guys personally, I can tell that it means an awful lot to Charles to have that support and kind of moving forward, because he's not crazy. That's one thing when you're out there by yourself and you're fighting, this Goliath, you think that, am I crazy? So I think that it requires a team to support him and to really, I can't underscore the importance of creating a little committee to study it. Even if it's 3 staffers that, you commit 3 staffers and they've got to come together every day and talk about what's going on and what's the latest on his financial, constraints, what's the latest on this. And then again, in parallel, trying to get these federal agencies to act. Don't waste your time with the lower level people, because they may be great, but they're not the decision makers. You gotta hit the top, and a way to get to there is through the obviously the federal members of Congress can help, but so can the media, right? I mean, if CNN or Fox decides to do a little expose on what's going on, the debacle in Dunseith, then great. That will accelerate awareness in the public. You got to kind of do it all, but again, this is not for one man to solve. This is and it's not fair. And if he stopped doing everything today, where would we be at? We'd have these questionable parts in commercial airplanes that everybody has to rely on for the next 20 or 30 years. We'd have questionable national security potential leaking, and then you have this whatever weird stuff that's going on in the state that's allowing this kind of retaliatory action to occur against business people. That won't go away, So there's an opportunity here to fix a lot of things. It seems like, if there's a will.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is Alexander Castaneda. Ed, real quick. I agree with what you're saying about, kind of keeping a pulse on it, because we can't do it alone. But just a very quick, just expectation management. You may not know, every state senator and representative in state of North Dakota has 0 staff. So it is just us alone and unafraid. Doesn't, right, wrong, or indifferent. I did just want to let you know, though, that um, that's kind of how we operate. So that way, if sometimes you feel we might not be moving as fast as you might like or anything along those lines, just a little grace, because we are by ourselves, 0 staff, and that's kind of sometimes unheard of. But just so you know, that's it.
No, that's good to know. I didn't know that. And that's even more of a reason then to try to leverage the media to get attention on this topic, So I wish I could say there's a silver bullet, but it's going to take a lot of work and effort. But you've got some determined people there, so that's a good sign.
I think the silver bullet truly is the people picking up this story, because it's the same with the Chinese mill in Grand Forks, or whatever that was, Fufang or whatever it was. It wasn't going to get addressed, but the people made enough noise and made the concerns big enough that it became a topic that everyone started squawking about. And I think this has to be the same, the vehicle, because there is so much involvement from the players that don't want to take the responsibility for what's happened here. I think Charles walked into a very unfortunate circumstance, not because he wanted to, but I think he was set up to be a fall guy, and he needs justice. And if we truly want to be a state that really says that we believe in economic development, we need to cut the junk that's going on to hinder and hamper him, and let's prove, that we are, and let's cut the chains and let the free market do its thing.
Very good.
And my heart goes out to him. I truly believe in justice, and I say we got to defend him all we can. But I got to sign off, you guys. I believe, Charles, you're chosen for such a fight as this, and you're not alone. I know that. So, Godspeed to you.
Thank you, Representative.
Yes, well said. And I have to sign off as well. I have to go pick up my daughter. But Representative Van Winkle said that very well, and I concur. And thanks for you guys doing this.
You guys make signing off sound so much fun. We might just all have to do that. So, I do appreciate everybody joining us today for this event. It has been good. It's been informative. Appreciate everybody that tuned in, asked questions, commented, created discussion surrounding it. As we do officially sign off, I guess for you, Charles, as we look forward to what's next for you, and I know we already kind of asked this at the end of the first hour, but you've heard some of the questions that the people have asked. You've heard some of the answers given from experts and stuff like that. What's next? What's the thing that we can do to support you in this legislative session and beyond?
Well, first, Ed and Joe and the legislators, senators, and representatives that are on call today, thank you. Sincerely, a year and a half ago, I was absolutely terrified. And seeing more and more people come behind us just gives me more confidence that we stayed for the right reasons. I was afraid to leave the site. At one point, an Army agent actually told me his bosses wouldn't let him look further, which goes to what Ed says about, you got to go above, you got to go to the top. And then he tried to give me personal advice to simply abandon the property. It's next steps. I think we need full engagement with the governor's office in a constructive and productive way, which it sounds like they're open to. And I think that's great. I think that we do need to engage federal agents. And I think Ed mentioned the word RICO, racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations. There is a state law on RICO and there's a federal law on RICO. there's also a federal law called 18 USC 1513E, which deals in retaliation against the livelihood of a federal witness or victim. I think all of those laws need to be carefully explored as to why we're having this discussion 2 years from now. And I certainly, having gone through all of this, I want to be part of a solution. So the way Ed and Joe have had their experiences, have witnessed things that they wish they hadn't seen, tried to report it, and now they spend, their spare time talking about it, and have even started an organization that's now devoted to that. I will be more than happy to lend my available time to helping make sure no one else has to deal with issues like this in this state. And helping government understand what happened with the flight sensors, because some of the records we've uploaded today, including the lawsuit particularly that was done to clear the site, it goes into great detail how a scheme like this was allowed to unfold. And there's a lot of technical failures in oversight at the government level that occurred at different stages from 2015 and beyond, where this all could have been recognized and stopped. And I certainly don't mind lending my voice to being part of constructive solutions in any way forward. And absolutely, I want to be able to run my business and get a resolution with the state, tomorrow, preferably. So thank you, everybody.
Very good. Thank you, Charles. And thank you, Ed and Joe, for joining us. As we close out, are there any last words that you want to leave us with? We'll put you guys on the spot. If not, that's fine.
Joe, why don't you go first, and I'll follow you there.
Thanks for reaching out, Charles. And, we appreciate all the information you've provided. And it gives us another window into, what our passion is, which is aviation safety. And Ed's passion is beyond that to his ex-military. So thank you for the information.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you guys for involving us. We work with victim families frequently, and we talk about things that are preventable, and none of us want to have that regret that we didn't do everything we could to prevent another tragedy. And so this is a big deal. I really am hopeful that I'm encouraged to hear the engagement that's occurring in North Dakota government, and hopefully that will continue. And then whatever we can do to kind of help move the ball down the court. And, want to help Charles get back to building RVs, because we all want to be able to enjoy a little bit more recreation these days. So thank you for inviting us.
Very good. Appreciate that. Do want to say again, thank you to everybody that tuned in to watch us, to the legislators, to the viewers, to everyone. Really appreciate it. Made this a good event. So
yeah, we really appreciate it for everyone that tuned in, comment, liked, whatever it might have been throughout the video. We appreciate every state legislator that took time out of their night to participate in this as well. So like Jonathan said, just to echo it, a big thank you to everyone that participated tonight.
And to all those out there, be sure to like and subscribe. Join the community here at the Dakota as we continue to talk about stories like this and others that affect North Dakota on the daily basis. Thank you for watching this episode. Have a great day.